You are listening to the Health and Wellness Connection podcast, the #1 wellness podcast designed to provide the latest information to help you achieve your health and wellness goals. Our show features exciting guests, the latest in medical research, and in-depth discussions in current trends on weight loss, nutrition, and fitness. No matter what your interest, the Health and Wellness podcast has you covered. And now, presenting your illustrious host, Dr. Barry, MD.
Hello, and welcome back to the Health and Wellness Connection. It's your host, Dr. Barry, and I want to thank you for joining us with what I hope will be a very informative, entertaining, and just kind of, eye-opening episode, guys. So, again, this is April of 2024. We are going to really do a deep dive into some of the latest topics in the health and wellness space. Now, of course, guys, kind of been a little slow lately, but I do have some pretty exciting stories and a really healthy episode today. So hopefully you got some time to kick it with your boy and just stay tuned. First things first, I want to give a shout out to all the listeners and the fans, guys. We've been going hard now for a few years, and we've been trying to keep up with the demand, and hopefully we're providing that for you. If you have any questions or any concerns or any story ideas or collaboration requests, please don't hesitate to send that out to our email at drbarryhealth@gmail.com. That's drbarryhealth@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to check us out on TikTok at Dr. Barry Health, as well as on Instagram at Dr. Barry MD. All right, so we're gonna hopefully get you some up to date on what's out there as far as health and wellness news wire. We like to go into some of the research articles that have been published that really show some possible breakthroughs in the health and wellness space, and hope to bring that to you today in a way that you can easily digest it. So guys, first things first, let's talk about this story regarding the new requirements from the Biden administration, right, to fix these national water standards. So I know we've talked about things known as forever chemicals on this show quite a bit, and for good reason, because forever chemicals are chemicals that are found inside a lot of plastics and other things that are very commonly seen in our environment, and it's leading to production of very harmful chemicals known as forever chemicals, actually known as polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. These are things that are interesting and considered very dangerous because these things are actually ingested into the body. They're found in our water system very commonly, and they don't go away. So they hide in our body tissues, can cause inflammation, which we know is very bad, can actually cause cancer and other very dangerous conditions. If you remember a few episodes ago, we talked about how there was recently a study that was performed where they actually went into folks who had a condition known as carotid obstruction due to what we considered was plaque and other inflammatory items. People have to actually go into the arteries in their necks and clean them out, because if these plaques get too large, it can actually cause strokes and other very dangerous complications. So one study, they actually went in there and looked and saw what was in these plaques and these blockages that were in the arteries, and a lot of them contain these forever chemicals. So these things are pretty concerning, and there's more and more data coming out every year showing how dangerous, how carcinogenic they are. Just not really good for consumption. So I guess in response to this, the Biden administration has now created a new rule requiring better filtration across America as far as the water supply to ensure that these chemicals are completely removed out of the system. They've actually regulated over 12,000 types of these chemicals. So this is something I think is extremely good, because these chemicals are very dangerous, and getting these things out of public exposure is very important. And because the water systems don't really filter these things very well currently, I think that we have to definitely work on making sure these chemicals are removed. So, like I said, these chemicals are very dangerous, and, this actually, follows a health advisory that was put out there in 2022 by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where they talked about these forever chemicals and how they kind of alerted people to the dangers. And we've talked about these as well on many episodes on this show. So ultimately, I think this is a great deal. This will probably lead to increased prices for, water treatment and management. So you may see a little bit of increase of a tax on your water bill once these things start kicking off. But I think it's a good thing, because these forever chemicals are very dangerous. They can cause cancer, they cause cause inflammation. Who knows all the other illnesses they're contributing to. And I think if they're removed, it's nothing but a good thing. Now, if you don't want to wait for the government to actually do the work, you want to maybe figure out a way to protect yourself currently. First off, you want to avoid using plastics, guys. So try to minimize plastic usage, especially reheating plastics. Great way to get chemicals into the food. So you want to, minimize plastic use, as well as, focus on maybe getting a reverse osmosis water filter in your home. Those aren't too expensive. About a couple $100 will have one installed. You can at least filter out your drinking water, and then kind of, just really the ingestion is where the concern is. If you bathe in water that may be potentially containing forever chemicals, you're probably not as affected. However, drinking it, that's where those dangers really get develop. So again, forever chemicals, hopefully there'll be more work on the national level to help get water treatment plants and other organizations that deal with water processing on board, so they can ensure that the water that they're producing is going to be free of these chemicals. And this is, I think, a welcome development as far as the overall development of the country is concerned. All right, guys, so moving on, another study that came across my desk I want to talk about shows that there very well may be a strong link between the metabolic and mental health. Now, we always assumed this was actually the case, but there's now a pretty interesting study that just was produced that shows that this may be a real, measurable kind of issue here. So this came out recently on the latest latest issue of the JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, this past April 2nd. And it looked at, I guess over 200,000 people, what they addressed their blood work and saw that they had high blood sugars and high triglycerides, which is another, as well as low high density lipoprotein, HDL. So again, they looked at their fat, the amount of fat or cholesterol in their blood, as well as their sugar levels, and they found that those who had elevated levels of triglycerides, high glucose and other things, also had higher levels and higher risks of depression, anxiety, and other stress-related disorders. So it's showing that, there's definitely some potential risk of developing these mental issues due to consistently abnormal lab work. So yeah, very interesting study. Again, these people behind this study were out of Stockholm, Sweden, out of the Karolinska Institute. And they looked at, again, 200,000 people and they looked at, they had a mean age of 42 years of age, and they did a initial blood work, and then they followed them up 21 years later, right? So out of the 200,000 people that they looked at, and this is called the apolipoprotein related mortality risk report, where they looked at the people who had higher levels of cholesterol and other, lipoproteins, and saw what illnesses that they tend to have a lot of. And what they found was that out of the 200,000, about 16,000 people were diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or other stress-related disorders. So a significant portion, and they found that out of all the people who were diagnosed with a depression or other mental health disorders, they found that those who had higher levels of triglycerides and sugars had a much higher risk of developing depression, anxiety, or stress-related disorders. And it was almost like a 20-30% increased risk or increased chance of developing those disorders. So this obviously leads to concerns about whether or not, there are some particularly measurable lab values that can be done to predict people's risk of depression, which is something that was suspected couldn't be done. And the exact link that would lead to that isn't still really clear yet. Clearly more research needs to be done in this regard. But, if there's something we're seeing now, that if we're having people who had high levels of sugars, high levels of protein, of lipoproteins, and then 21 years later, there's a significant rise in mental illness in these people, I think clearly, we have to look closer at that. And hopefully we can figure out a way or understand the link of why this may be the case. But yeah, this is a pretty significant study. 200,000 people is quite a bit. So, they're looking at that large number, and you see obvious links, and I think definitely more research needs to be done. And of course, the high sugars, high cholesterol levels, also usually associated with obesity, which we've also have looked at previous research that show there's issues there between obesity and just all sorts of illnesses, from cancer, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, now mental illness and the like. So I think getting, your health in order is so critical, from a physical standpoint as well as a mental standpoint. And studies like this are showing that, it's something that we haven't even been able to quantify the benefits of lowering those, cholesterol levels, improving your overall health, because your mental health is clearly linked to your physical. All right, guys. So moving on, there is a new weight loss tool. We talk about all the new weight loss methods here, guys. We've kind of really deep dive into all the popular weight loss things that are taking over well before they did, and just give myself a pat on the back because we are on top of these guys. But there's a new one on the horizon that will come out pretty soon, and it may be an option you may want to consider if you're looking at trying to find ways to help you with weight loss. This one is called the Vibes. So imagine the Vibrating Ingestible Bioelectronic Stimulator, or Vibes. It's actually a capsule, okay? And you swallow this capsule, and the capsule's about the size of a large multivitamin pill. You swallow this capsule, and after you swallow it, it starts to vibrate in your stomach, right? And so what it does, it vibrates, and it somehow triggers the receptors in your stomach that triggers fullness and satiety. So it kind of stimulates the stomach, fooling the stomach into thinking you're full, reducing your appetite and desire to eat. And then over time, it's believed that this can help with weight loss. So, now what they tried, which I do like how they did their study to test out this new device to see if it would be effective. They looked at pigs. So they gave it to a pig, and anyone who's worked with pigs or been in a situation where pigs are around, they love to eat. So if you can get a pig to not eat, you're doing something pretty impressive. So they actually used pigs, and they gave them a version of this Vibes kind of tablet to see how it would work with them and their appetite. And they found that across 108 meals, the swine that had the Vibes, in their tummies had 40% reduced food intake. So it's pretty impressive. So if you have a pig eating 40% less, that's a pretty good achievement, because pigs can eat anything from grass to concrete to metal, like cans. Like pigs are like pigs. They eat anything. So if you can get the pigs to eat less, then chances are you'll get humans to eat less with this technology. And that's what the people who invented this thing are actually betting on. So I actually like the concept, because you're eating something that, is, potentially, not invasive. You're not having to cut open anything. You just got to swallow the pill, and then you let the pill do its thing. Now, you probably will have to poop it out later, so you may have to go fish it out from the toilet, which may not be fun. But, if you can do this over a period of time and lose weight, maybe it might be worth it. I don't know. So who knows how they'll make it. Maybe it's disposable, maybe it won't be. But I can anticipate if it's not disposable, it'll probably cost a lot. That being said, I think it's something that should be closely followed, because I think all sorts of weight loss techniques should be available, not just injections or other methods. I think having a variety of choices is always going to be ideal, just so people can have whatever works best for them. But yes, so the Vibes, guys, is going to be soon approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and hopefully it'll be available very soon. And if it's something that's used, I think I think it has to be tested in humans though as well. So they will have to do human trials on this first. Once that happens, and then they get cleared, and then hopefully it will be an ideal alternative for those who don't want the injection or don't want any chemicals. They want to try another method to lose weight. And I think this could be potentially be an effective way. Now, we'll see. All right, guys, the next study we're going to discuss looks at abdominal fat location and how that may be linked to brain health. So this is particularly looking at those people developing Alzheimer's. And they've always tried to determine what's causing Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's is one of those illnesses that once you get it, it's pretty much a done deal. There's not many effective treatments to treat it. So the idea is to prevent it if you can. So looking at things that may lead to Alzheimer's is something that's of great interest in the scientific research community. So they looked at body fat, and they're seeing that whether or not there's a certain area of body fat that may be linked to higher risks of Alzheimer's. And what they've saw in some preliminary studies show that higher pancreatic fat is linked to lower cognition and brain volumes. Now, the pancreas is part of your digestive system, and it's important in digestion. It secretes a lot of very powerful enzymes that help your body break down food for proper metabolistic uses. Now, so when you eat something, your pancreas, along with other organs, work to break down the food, and it actually helps, metabolize things for you. So it's also a popular place where people who develop, who have a lot of fat or, body, they have a higher BMI, a body mass index, they tend to store fat around the stomach inside the visceral organs. So they found that those who had more fat in their abdominal fat areas tend to have more or higher risk of Alzheimer's. Now, this study here, they looked at about 200 people, so not very large, and this was done in Israel. And they, studied, people who had, they studied the abdominal MRI scans, right? People who had MRIs of their stomach for whatever reason, looked and saw those who had higher levels of fat. Then they monitored these people over time to see whether or not there was any, increased risk of developing mental illness or, Alzheimer's related illnesses. So what they found was that, people who had higher body mass indexes obviously had higher pancreatic fat levels as well. And they were saying that after they adjusted for cardiovascular risk factors like the other illnesses like high blood pressure, diabetes that also cause things like this, they found that just obesity and higher pancreatic fat levels were linked to lower global cognition, meaning poor brain function, and executive function as well was lower. And they had lower hippocampal volume. The hippocampus is part of the brain that's important for, brain function as well as memories and things like that. And they found those who had higher levels of pancreatic fat had lower levels across the board. So it's pretty crazy that, it seems like body fat, particularly abdominal fat, is somehow increasing people's risk for Alzheimer's. Now, we know Alzheimer's can also be a result of strokes and people who have blockages in their brain as far as their blood flow. The arteries in the brain may be calcified or full with blockages, which also could be linked to forever chemicals too. So, but in a nutshell, obesity, higher body fat levels, showing that there could be a strong link with mental disorders like Alzheimer's. So, this is the second study now we're talking about in regards to mental illnesses in relation to body illnesses. So it just shows it's all connected. The head is connected to the neck, connected to the body. So, neglecting your metabolic health is very dangerous to your mental health. So let's hopefully keep this in mind as we, decide how we're going to be moving out here. All right, guys. So another study looks at very commonly popular dietary trend called intermittent fasting. And something we've talked about here as well. I think it's a great option to lose weight, but there's some concern about potentially it being linked to other illnesses that are potentially dangerous, like cardiovascular disease. Now, what they found was that this study was done out of Shanghai, China. It was out of Shanghai Jiao Tong University School of Medicine. And Dr. Zhong, who was the lead author, looked at kind of a observational analysis. They looked at a database of over 20,000 people, right, who were participating in intermittent fasting. So they only ate over an 8-hour period every day. And they found that those who did that apparently had higher risk of cardiovascular mortality compared with those who ate over the 12 to 16 hours per day. So, and, they looked at, those who had intermittent fasting behaviors versus those who didn't. And it seems like there was some sort of increase in cardiovascular disease in those who participated in the intermittent fasting. So they looked at about 20,000 people, as we said. The mean age is about 48 years old, 50% women, 50% men. So pretty evenly assessed study. They looked at those who participated in a health survey, where they looked at those who competed because they have 2 24-hour questionnaires they have to participate in. And so they did that, and then they looked toward the end of the period. So 2003, when they started, ended 2018. So after 2019, they looked at those who died and what they died from and this and that. So they found that out of the 20,000, there were about 2,800 people who died, and 840 people who died out of the 2,800 died of cardiovascular deaths, and about 600 died of cancer. So, it was definitely a broad spectrum of things that affected these people. Now, what they found was that those who were intermittent fasters, meaning they did mainly intermittent style dieting, they had a increased risk of cardiovascular cause of death. So, now it wasn't a huge risk, but it was definitely a significant risk. So not only were the people who had intermittent fasting had higher cardiovascular risk, they also had less lean muscle mass. So, it's true that intermittent fasting may be good for weight loss, but there's definitely some potential side effects, potentially with this increased heart or cardiovascular complications like stroke, heart attack, as well as less lean muscle, which we know lean muscle is very important as well for overall health, as well as mental health. So, there's definitely not, the intermittent fasting is great for weight loss, in my opinion. Using it as a daily movement can potentially have side effects. But I think more importantly than the time and when you're eating is what you're eating. So if you're eating healthy, nutritious options, even if you're eating it in the 8 hours the intermittent fasting, recommends, I think those risk factors are going to also help as far as reducing that if you're eating healthier options versus eating unhealthy options for that 8-hour period. So anyways, interesting study. This definitely needs more detail, especially regarding what the people ate. They didn't really talk about that. They just focused on the time frame they ate in. So overall, I think intermittent fasting is still definitely, I think, a viable option, especially if you're trying to lose weight. However, I think if you're going to do it regularly, you want to make sure you're giving yourself good, well-balanced diets to reduce the risk of complications from the, issues that can develop from intermittent fasting, like what we're seeing now, potentially increased risk of cardiovascular events. So be careful, guys. Okay, guys, so another interesting thing that popped up on my feed I wanted to mention was that there's a warning from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration that says that one of the very popular weight loss drugs, semaglutide, Ozempic, everyone's using it for weight loss, apparently there's been increased risk of skin findings, right? So people are getting skin numbness, sensitivity, even reports of potential hair loss. So because of this, there's some, researchers putting out articles in this regard, people having these side effects. And it seems like there's some, concern now in this area, and people are going to be monitoring this a little closer. And this is really those who are taking the oral version of semaglutide, which is typically what was found to be associated with these links, as opposed to the injection. The injection usually has lower side effects versus the oral pill. But anyways, those who took at least 50 milligrams of the pill in their condition were found to have reports of altered skin sensations like numbness or hypersensitivity, skin pain, things like that. There were also reports of hair loss as a result of using the oral version of semaglutide. And these are the people who took 50 milligrams a week. Now, those who took actually the injection, which is usually like a 0.5 milligram dose every week, they actually had no reports of any of these too. So that's pretty interesting. So if you're definitely, I think, on the semaglutide, you want to be on the injection. People don't like, hair loss, especially if it's not controlled. So, skin issues, hair issues, if you're having any of those potential symptoms and you're on any of these weight loss injections like semaglutide, just definitely talk to your doctor. But I think those who are on the injection variation of this aren't probably affected as opposed to those who are taking the pills. All right, guys, so moving on. Now a little more serious topic here. We're talking about we're talking about the increased risk of suicide that's being seen in Black men in America. So a very interesting study came across my desk, and it looked at, basically what was causing what we're seeing as a spike in suicide risk in adult Black men. And they're saying that there's a potential direct association between perceptions of threat, racial discrimination, and other potential violent traumatic episodes that are affecting Black men's ability to cope and causing increased rates of depression, especially here in America. So this was done by a researcher, Dr. Steve Kogan, that's out of University of Georgia here in the United States. And they looked at what was potentially causing some of these risks, because there's been a large spike in suicide amongst this group, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. And what they found was that, first off, suicide is the second leading cause of death for Black Americans aged 15 to 24, according to the CDC. And Black men, suicide risk is about 4 times that of black women. So there's definitely concern about the black men and what's causing the spike and increased risk of suicidation. And it's believed that, according to this study, they're saying there's increased concern for racism, discrimination, and poverty, which are some, as well as social adversity, which may be increasing these risks seen in this population. So what they did was they looked at 504 people in the African American Men's Project, which they did surveys, sent out a series of surveys that the young men were to complete at 3 different time points over about a 3-year period, right? And they looked and saw, what these people were saying, how they were responding to the surveys. And, these are about 21 years of age on average as far as all the participants in the study. And they looked at, the survey asked them if they had experienced any kind of adverse experiences, any extreme situations that really caused them to second guess their value, things like that. And they found that overall 33% of the people who participated in the study reported suicidal thought in the previous week. So this is pretty crazy. So imagine 500 people, and out of that 500, a third of them, which is pretty significant amount, said they had thoughts of suicide. And they said that, the history of racial discrimination was associated with a lot of these people having thoughts, that they felt that other people characterized them, that they were untrustworthy, or they felt that others were untrustworthy or uncaring or hostile toward them. So all these things they felt were leading to the increased thoughts of suicide or self-harm in this group. So I think that this is pretty alarming, I think, and how, especially young black men are potentially in a situation where they feel there's no hope or there's no one out there to assist them. And I think that, number one, if you're having thoughts of suicide or depression, definitely reach out. There are a lot of suicide help lines that are out there that are out here trying to assist those who may have concerns and need help and they don't know who to call, reach out to. If you don't have friends or family or any kind of organizations that you can reach out to, I highly recommend looking at, one of these depression hotlines. I think one of the best ones I've seen recently is 988. It's a suicide crisis lifeline you can call anywhere in the United States, dial 988, and it'll put you right in contact with someone who's a mental health professional, can help kind of assist you and give you free information where you can go for local support in person and other resources that you may not be aware of. So 988 is I think a really excellent resource. So it's a United States based resource. So if you're an international listener, I would definitely encourage you to Google some of the local resources in your area to help. But yeah, 988 for those who are United States. Because again, suicide is something that's very real. As an emergency room physician, I have to deal with this a lot and to see people who are struggling with this. And it could be a very, traumatic experience. And if you're thinking of harming yourself due to some extreme situations in your life, just know there's always someone available who can help. You may or may not know them, but I think that people understanding that is very important. So 988 is one option. Definitely want to look at those who you trust as well, who can assist you. And you can always go to your local emergency room as well. If you're in an extreme situation or you've done something, go to your local ER, and your ER doctor there can help figure out ways to make sure you're okay, as well as get you in the direction of assistance that can help treat your condition and hopefully get you to a better spot. All right. Okay, guys, so back to diet. Another study has shown that there's apparently potentially a link, right, between a pro-inflammatory diet, salt intake, and increased type 2 diabetes. So I think we all kind of suspected this, especially knowing that inflammation is really the worst thing you can really have as far as illness. All real illnesses are somehow linked to uncontrolled inflammation, including diabetes. And it's showing that now that if you've been definitely having a high inflammatory diet, a lot of processed foods, a lot of fried foods, a lot of sugar, things like that, you are going to have increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So what they found was that people who engage in these high inflammatory diets, they had actually a score they created based on the people who ate certain foods. They scored them. Certain people had a higher score on this scoring system, were considered pro-inflammatory dietary individuals. Those who had better scores were low inflammatory diets. So this helped them figure out, people who had high scores as far as in dietary scores, what conditions were they, potentially developing. And they looked at over 170,000 people. This is again from the UK Biobank. The mean age of the participants was 55 years of age. So they looked at those with those habitual salt intakes, those high inflammatory dietary intake, and they found that those who were free of diabetes when they started the research, right, and they followed them up 13 years later after seeing how they were doing, and they found that those who, had those high inflammatory scores were associated with 18% higher risk in developing type 2 diabetes, right? So those who were eating those fried foods, high salt, all those foods, processed foods, everything else, they developed diabetes almost 20% more than those who didn't. So, so it just shows that there's definitely a link between what you're eating and your illnesses. So if you're getting all these illnesses, chances are it's what you've consumed on a daily basis causing them, not some random exposure to something that you had one time. All right, guys, moving on. So there's a new study as well that talks about ginger, cinnamon, and cumin, right? And how they may be effective for control in diabetes. So, this is actually pretty awesome. A lot of people who actually study these medications, I think, have already known this for a while, but there's definitely some improvement in sugar management. Those people who had exposure to these spices. So now, what they found was that the Mediterranean diet, which is something that is being celebrated as a diet that's great for diabetics, they tend to use these ingredients quite a bit in a lot of the foods they cook, including ginger, cinnamon, black cumin, turmeric, saffron. Things like that have been shown to be very effective for glucose management. Now, this study looked at about 77 different studies, right? Over 3,000 people were participating in these studies. It looked at, how people were being, treated, and whether or not if they switched to these, Mediterranean diets that use these spices quite a bit, they could determine if they had better glucose management. And so what they found was that people who were in this diet, they looked at, again, this is multiple studies, guys. So it wasn't just one study, but they looked at different studies and people who, had their fasting glucose levels checked, and they were type 2 diabetics, and they were, exposed to the cinnamon, the turmeric, the ginger, the black cumin, saffron. They had across the board decreased levels of blood sugars. So these spices were helping these diabetics maintain proper blood sugar. Now, they said the most significant decreases amongst all the spices was black cumin, followed by cinnamon and ginger. So, and also there was an improvement in the hemoglobin A1C, and that is actually the level of blood glucose that's measured, that's coating the blood cells. And this is important because it monitors people who had long-standing elevation of blood sugar. And when you have high levels of blood sugar over a period of time, that hemoglobin A1C level becomes more accurate. So doctors use that hemoglobin A1C to determine if someone has been good of keeping their sugar down over a period of time versus the one-time check that they do when they do the typical blood test. So they found that the ginger and black cumin help with the A1C reduction, which means that those two are probably very effective over time in keeping your blood sugar down. And also cinnamon and ginger were associated with decreasing insulin levels. So we know insulin levels being low is good because insulin promotes weight gain. Insulin promotes your metabolism. It actually promotes you storing fat, getting bigger, things like that. So, that's very good if you want to lose weight. So I think ideally these spices, especially like cumin, ginger, saffron, all those things should be, I think, part of your diet. I'm a huge fan of saffron, especially. I just recently returned from Dubai and we got some pretty awesome saffron. I was out there. Ideally, you want to do a lot of research. We may do some special spice research, a spice show, just talk about some of these interesting spices and how they can be effective in health in a future episode. But definitely want to, I think, look at incorporating a lot of these spices, ginger, cinnamon, cumin. Cinnamon is delicious. So if you're eating something and not, especially something sweet, like I have a cinnamon roll, even though I know a cinnamon roll will help, even though because it's full of grease and fat, but it's so good. At least I feel better now that when I'm eating my cinnamon roll that I'm lowering my blood sugar, even though it's coated in icing. But no, don't do that, guys. So ultimately, cinnamon, I think, is a very awesome spice in addition to ginger, turmeric, and other like. And so, yeah, so just very interesting. Keep up using those if you are, and may want to start introducing those to your diet if you're not. All right, and so guys, the last study, we're kind of going over time here. Had a couple more studies here, but we may have to just kind of put that on the next show. Interesting study about dogs. Now, apparently dogs are able to sniff out PTSD and other trauma in human breath. So imagine, you could be, at a therapy session next time, and you may see a dog there sniffing out, if you're telling the truth or not, as far as if you've not been stressed out. So apparently there's been some new, data but there's been a new research that showed that dogs can be trained to help detect people who have PTSD and other mental illnesses. And there's apparently organic compounds in human breath that are associated with these conditions. So apparently if you get PTSD or if you have some sort of traumatic episode in your life, you can actually start secreting a certain chemical in your breath, your sweat glands, that apparently dogs can be trained to perceive and detect, which is pretty amazing. I mean, dogs are amazing animals, but now that they can sniff out mental illness and other medical issues in these nanoparticles that are being excreted by people who have these conditions, it's something that's pretty amazing in my opinion. So apparently this research group, they had some dogs that were trained to detect these chemicals in people, and they had about 40 people who participated, and about half of them had confirmed PTSD. They had their diagnosis already. The funny thing is all these people were actually apparently using cannabis, which is kind of interesting. But either way, these people were known PTSD sufferers, and the dogs, of course, didn't know that. They just kind of gave samples of their breath and their urine and so forth, and the dogs had to sniff these samples, and they were able to sniff out up to a 90% accuracy level who had PTSD and who didn't. So it's pretty crazy. Like, imagine you're in the situation and the dogs, who are trained, basically they're kind of scientists. They're probably psychiatrists at this point. Now, maybe they can actually treat the PTSD, but these dogs apparently using only the samples could sniff out those who had PTSD versus those who did not have PTSD. And for the record, it was a golden retriever and a German Shepherd who were involved in these dogs. So, these German Shepherds are some of the smartest dogs around, so I'm sure that didn't hurt. But ultimately, these, dogs were able to sniff out those who had mental illness, and it's pretty impressive. So hopefully, if this continues, these dogs can be used to, determine, who may be, actually having issues related to these mental illnesses versus those who may not be. And I think it's something that needs to be definitely expanded upon. Now, that being said, this wasn't cheap. The dogs apparently cost about $50,000 to train to do this. So, that's pretty expensive. If you gave someone $50,000 with PTSD, that may be a good way to treat their illness as opposed to, now who knows? Let me not joke. But PTSD is very real. And these dogs, if they can be trained to do this, I think this could be a pretty awesome way to approach management of mental illness and maybe see if the treatments are actually working. Maybe they can see if these chemicals are going up or down based on people's response to treatment. So yeah, interesting study there. But again, that's the end of the show, guys. We've been going on for a while here. Thank you guys for listening to the show. Hopefully you got something out of it. I mean, I think we've been trying to get things together, and we'll continue these shows as long as you guys continue to want them. And if you want to check us out, first off, hope you're following the show on your favorite podcasting service. Spotify is who we host a show with, but anyone will definitely be effective, I think, if you can get the show on the feed and subscribe to it on your phones or your favorite device. Also, follow us on Instagram at Dr. Barry MD, as well as email us at drbarryhealth@gmail.com, and we're on TikTok at Dr. Barry Health. Thanks for listening, guys. Hope to see you again soon for a future show. Peace, God bless, and much love. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Health and Wellness Connection podcast and radio show. For more information on ways to get healthy, please check us out. www.anchor.fm/HW Connection. Here you can re-listen to the show, check out older shows, and even further support the show by becoming a subscriber to the podcast. Please check us out today. Again, that's anchor.fm/HW Connection. And also, don't forget to follow Dr. Barry on Instagram at drbarrymd. Until next time, stay healthy.